Thank you very much. My name is Beerend. I'm an anatomy teacher at Leiden University Medical Center, and I will hand on the microphone directly to my colleague Thomas Hierck, which is director of. Well, he can introduce himself, right?
Hi, I'm at the Center for Innovation of Leiden University. Very nice to be here. And there we work on new media applications for education. We do that for all of the university, for all faculties, but also with the medical faculty. So let me start right away with the project that we have been undertaking together with Beerend. So our challenge was at the beginning of the project, how do we help students understand complex 3D structures for human anatomy? And the goals were not just to have a 3D structure, but also to help students learn the skills like coordination and perception that they need in practice. So how do we get that learning experience into the practical situations that students find themselves in? And we want to do it in an authentic learning environment. Now, to do this, we looked at augmented reality as a technology. And why did we do that? Well, first of all, augmented reality is fully 3D. So the holograms that we work with the Microsoft HoloLens, are fully 3D. That means you can walk around the hologram to study it. Right? The hologram is interactive. That means that you can explore it, that you can switch structures on and off. And that really stimulates active learning with students and that they can interact with the hologram. Then the Microsoft HoloLens, this unique device, also allows for multiple students to look at the same 3D anatomical model that we present in our application. So that means that you can collaborate and work together. And finally, we connected the body of the student to the anatomical 3D model projected in the HoloLens. So the body of the student is connected to this display information. I think that's a really unique aspect, and we can explain more about that when we present the two apps that we built using this technology. And Beerend will also explain a bit more about the research we did into the learning effects of this new technology. So with this, I want to hand it over to Beerend to present the first app.
Thank you very much. The first application, can you?
Yeah.
Yes, the first application is Dynamicanatomy. It's can you? Well, I can do it myself. So while you are watching this movie, Dynamicanatomy is a fully immersive, fully interactive, fully shareable application. You can see the student wearing a HoloLens, and the hologram is moving in front of them. They work collaboratively, so they are looking at the same object at the same time. As a teacher, you can interact with both them and with the model, and we do not only present it to you, we brought the HoloLenses, so after this session you are free to come and join us and experience the apps that we made. What Thomas mentioned already is that we use trackers to couple the movements of your own feet. In this case, Dynamicanatomy deals with the lower leg and with the ankle joints, and you can see live that your own feet is able to move the foot. And this way, this effective learning component is fully covered in this application. We have developed another nice application, and Thomas is going to present that to you.
Yes, so here you see the other application we developed. This one is about the lungs and listening to the lungs. Currently, when doctors practice listening to lung sounds and discovering lung diseases, they practice basically on each other, right? So students practice on each other. So you can listen to another student's lungs and listen to the sounds, but you obviously only hear like the positive sounds because students generally are not ill in their lungs. And then you have to go behind the computer and listen to the illnesses. We wanted to connect this. So we placed a 3D model of the lungs over the body of a student, and on those lungs we projected the sounds of illnesses. So for example, when you have water in the lungs or fluids in your lungs, you can now listen to what kind of noise that makes on another student. And again, we connected the digital information to the students because we felt like you shouldn't just learn from a 3D model, you should still have that interaction with the patient, still that interaction with that other student, because that's also something that you have to learn when you want to become a doctor. And maybe I can shortly play the film. So this is how it works.
Now I'm going to position it in your body. Right. You can walk towards the hologram and put it on the outside of the rib cage in order to hear Wong sounds.
So maybe we can.
Yeah, after this presentation, I'm happy to demonstrate also the app and that you can try it out yourself as well. But let me give it to Beerend for the research part.
So you probably all medical professionals or educationalists, and you probably recognize the fact that students usually learn from books in 2D, and patients are not 2D but 3D. So there's a gap in knowledge between the theoretical and practical phases of their study. So what we envisioned is that this could bridge this gap, but obviously we need some evidence for that. So we designed an experiment in which we took this Dynamicanatomy application, we made a variant of this application that you could show on the computer screen, and then we asked a group of students to learn from a book. Before doing that, we measure their spatial ability, and in this case spatial ability is the ability to mentally transform 2D images, so from a picture to a 3D representation, and mentally rotate that. And that's literature says is positively associated with anatomy learning and with technical skills performance. So in the next so we performed this experiment with 60 subjects, and the subjects were our students. What usually happens in these kinds of studies is that you don't really see an effect. The measured effect is usually marginal. There was a small effect between the desktop model, in which you can see monoscopically, and the Atlas group. But then if we stratified these results for spatial ability, and our students had either a good or a bad spatial ability, so we took the mean, and everything what was less than mean was kind of bad. We are very dichotom about this, and right from the mean it's good, right? So if we stratify for spatial ability, the students with a good spatial ability, they perform equally well in every group. So they learn from a book, as well as from a computer screen, as well from these 3D models. But students with low spatial abilities, they learn very badly from this computer screen. So if you have a rotating model from a computer screen, they are very challenged to learn with this model. Then if you present them with a full 3D hologram, then they perform equally well as the students with a good spatial ability. As you can see, the group, the 3D group, so the group that learned with a HoloLens, performed as well as the group with the textbook, so let's not ditch that for now. Probably there is some effect on of the study design in that, but I'm perfectly willing to discuss that afterwards with you. So in this way, and we are only scratching the surface of this research-informed innovations. We have many plans for the future. If you are willing to collaborate with us, please come over and discuss that with us, because we're very willing to collaborate with everybody. Thanks to you all for listening, and if you want to visit this website, you can learn everything about the innovations that we perform at Leiden University. Thank you very much.
Now the floor is open for questions. Any questions? Yeah, here.
So it's really basic. What's the difference between virtual reality and technology?
You want to cover that, Thomas?
Sure. With virtual reality, you're basically immersed within a computer-based environment. So you're basically completely locked off from the environment you find yourself in. With augmented reality, this technology superimposes digital information on reality. So you look through the glasses, you still see other students, you still see the room, but you additionally see this digital information, this holographic information.
Can I maybe add to that? Because what we saw when students work with this HoloLens, and they see each other, obviously, but what surprised us is that another form of augmentation is that they can also see their study material. So they can see the textbook as they learn from the 3D model. And that's in my view, the nice blend between all these technologies.
Thanks, very interesting work that you're doing. In terms of the sounds, do they get the sounds to the speakers on the HoloLens, or?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
And do you find, because I mean normally they would be using a stethoscope, are you exploring ways of reproducing the sounds to a stethoscope perhaps?
What we did test runs, of course, with students and with professionals, and they say the sounds from the HoloLens very much mimic the sounds that they get from a stethoscope. But obviously, we need some more. There's also room for some research over there to get into that particular aspect. Yeah.
One year.
Can you give me an idea of student learning curve when they adopt the technology? How much time do you have to spend explaining to them how to use the HoloLens before they can effectively?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So what we developed is a kind of learning experience in which we have the same interaction model, so the same menu, but they practice that in a 10 minutes period with a wooden cabin. So no anatomical model, so you don't spoil your students or your test results with pre-learning them anatomy, but they can do everything with this wooden canvas. They can select, they can hide stuff, they can move stuff. So they, within 10 minutes, they are fully equipped to start learning with the application itself.
One last question here.
You had a question, no?
I do, but you can go first if you like.
No. It's fine.
I'm chairing the session, so I'm not allowed to ask questions.
You're talking about how to applications about doing clinical examination. Looking into doing something similar along the lines of clinical skills and procedures. Do you know of any applications that's out there?
Yes, there are some really nice applications from Imperial. There are applications out there. What I should mention is that most of them deal with a superimposed picture or a superimposed 3D model on a patient. And then this model does not adapt to anything you change to that patient, of course. So I think that's the challenge for the common era, to look into that, to make these models interactive in the sense that they can deform and follow the patient's anatomy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for all the questions and for your presentation. We are now switching from AR augmented reality to virtual reality, I invited the next speaker, which is going to talk about clinical instructors' perception of virtual reality in health professionals CPR. Okay, thank you. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Beerend. I'm one of the students from the Chian School of Medicine. Thanks for coming today. Today I'll be talking about my research project. It's about using virtual reality to teach CPR. Okay, so these two pictures, they sum up what my entire project is about. The first picture is of somebody performing CPR on a mannequin. Basically, CPR is performed on people with cardiac arrest. That's when the heart stops pumping, and it happens when people have heart attacks or electrolyte disturbances in their blood, amongst other things. And the reason why CPR is so important for these situations is because their chances of survival increase significantly when it is being performed. However, what is shocking is that for bystander CPR, it's only performed less than 50% of the time. And what's even more alarming is that even when CPR is being performed, the survival rates are very low. So, for example, if someone develops cardiac arrest in the public, their chances of survival is only 1 in 10. And if you develop it in a hospital, it's 1 in 4. The reason why this happens has been studied, and people say that it's because the quality of CPR being performed is sometimes not very good, and some people are also very hesitant to perform CPR. There have been studies that showed that in order to bridge this gap between ideal and actual CPR being performed, education is one of the methods. The picture on the right shows someone using a virtual reality system. And I'm sure many of you will agree that with the advent of technology, education has improved in many ways, and one such form of technology is virtual reality. So what virtual reality is a form of technology that transports users into a three-dimensional, computer-simulated environment that they can interact with. And this has been shown to be very useful in many forms of education because it's able to improve memory, speed, accuracy, as well as application to real-life situations. So, third aim of my project is to understand perceptions of CPR instructors towards using virtual reality for CPR education. The reason why we chose CPR instructors as subjects for our project is because CPR instructors are very experienced in the realm of CPR education, and their opinions towards using virtual reality for this has not been explored. 3 research questions guided my project. The first one is, what are the views of CPR instructors towards current CPR education? The second is their views towards features of virtual reality they feel would be useful for CPR education. And the last is the potential of virtual reality in CPR education. So this is a picture of the CPR simulation I used for my project. It was created by the Institute of Technical Education. And in the first picture, you see one of my friends using the virtual reality headset. So he's given the environment of a playground and presented with the scenario of someone having cardiac arrest there. There are 2 modes for this CPR simulation. There's a tutorial mode and a simulation mode. So for the tutorial mode, it brings the user to step by step on how to respond to the situation. And for the simulation, it's sort of a test to see what they have learned, and it provides real-time feedback to them. So these were my methods. 30 CPR instructors were the subjects, and they were exposed to the virtual reality simulation. Semi-structured interviews were conducted before and after the simulation to find out their views towards current CPR education, as well as virtual reality, its useful features, and its possible role for CPR education. Okay, so these were my results. So it's a bit small, but basically they felt that current CPR education has its limitations in the form of unideal pre-test preparation. So they felt that resources were one of the limiting factors in that the instructor to student ratio is quite small, and there are not enough mannequins and other equipment to go around for everyone. Currently also use e-learning to administer CPR education, so this might not cater to different types of learning styles. Another thing they brought up was practice opportunities. So for many CPR students, right, they only get to practice once every 2 years when the recertification test is happening. So this is definitely not enough, unless you're working in the emergency department or intensive care unit when you actually have to do it on actual people. The third thing they brought up was that of motivation. So they found that many students just did not read the materials before they came. Yeah. And the last thing was the frame of mind when they went for the recertification test. Many of them had performance anxiety, so this affected the quality of CPR they performed, and they were also quite distracted during the test. The problem with this is that it's not just during the test that this happens, but it can also be translated to real life where they are not able to perform quality CPR. The limitations of current CPR education were reflected in their test performance. So there could be improvements made in terms of technique, procedure sequence, as well as landmark identification. These were their perspectives towards which features of virtual reality they felt were useful for CPR education. So the first thing they mentioned was fidelity, which is basically how the simulation is able to replicate what happens in real life. The second one they mentioned was that of engagement, and they felt that virtual reality is good in the fact that it's able to engage the students because it's interesting and fun and will appeal to many different types of audiences. The third thing was resource conservation. They felt that one virtual reality set could be shared amongst multiple people and they can use it at different points of time instead of having to have resource strain because of the number of instructors as well as the amount of equipment. And the last thing they brought up also was that of memory enhancement. They felt that virtual reality was able to reduce distractions and give students a focused task so that they're able to retain the skills better. Okay, so the last part is about their perspectives towards the potential virtual reality has for CPR education. So they felt that virtual reality would be useful as a blended learning tool together with the current style of teaching, which is e-learning. And they identified two target populations that can benefit from this. So the first one is novice learners, people who are learning CPR for the first time. And the second one would be experienced learners, people who are awaiting recertification. So for the novice learners, right, they felt that virtual reality will help them with the skills and memory mastery processes. And for experienced learners, it will give them opportunities to practice during the 2-year break when they are not practicing the CPR. Okay, so this is the conclusion for my project. CPR instructors perceive advantages in using virtual reality for health professional CPR education because it can overcome limitations of current CPR education. So we hope that what we can do is to use the features that are ideal for CPR suggested by the CPR instructors and implement them and test them out on target populations. So with this, we can identify the pedagogical benefits of virtual reality, and in this way, we hope that it can improve CPR education and hopefully reduce cardiac arrest deaths. Thank you.
I'm not going to ask questions. So who has questions?
Hi, very good presentation. That's a good collaboration with IT as well. We might have to mention IT has helped us there. My question is, how will you situate this in the actual CPR training? In the CPR training, the most difficult portion to perform is the measured depth and strength when you are doing CPR. And of course, that is outside the current realm of our VR. So how are you going to combine your concept of VR with the entire end-to-end training of CPR?
Okay. So one of the things that the CPR instructors brought up was that having hands-on technical skills are very important because CPR is a technical skill. You cannot just read a list of things and if you don't practice, then that would be very difficult. So since they brought it up, we're hoping to highlight it maybe to the people who created the program so that they can replicate it and hopefully we can test it out on the target audiences. I think this is also done in other countries whereby they have a mannequin that's, they use virtual reality but the mannequin is in front of them and then they can perform the CPR on the mannequin. Yeah, that would be very useful.
I was going to say that have you considered using haptic technology, so being able to measure how deep and what sort of compression are you giving, so that you're actually able to make sure that they perform CPR effectively?
Yeah, I think some forms of technology overseas also have that, and they can measure the volume of air you breathe in and everything. And I think that would be very useful. Thank you.
Any more questions? Because I think the last question is a very nice introduction to. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. And if I understand right, this work it can be. Your whole study is published, so people actually could look up and look at your study. So it's a very nice. Last question is a very nice introduction to the next speaker. So the next speaker is going to talk about the see-through visualization for learning and teaching of digital rectal examination and evaluation studies. So the floor is yours, Fernando.
Thank you, Nabil. I'm delighted to be here. I'm presenting this work on behalf of my co-authors. Really initial results from an evaluation study we did of a system we developed jointly with LKC Medicine and the Institute for Media Innovation at NTU. I'm Fernando Bello, I'm Professor of Surgical Computing and Simulation Science at Imperial. So this is where we're based, back at Imperial, back in London. We're based at Chelsea Westminster Hospital. Just a picture of the team, really. It is a combination of computer scientists, engineers. We also have clinicians. We have a couple of social scientists, as well as designers, really emphasizing the fact that working in this area, the best thing to do is to be multidisciplinary, really. Now, over the last 10 years, we've been working in developing learning tools for the teaching and learning of physical examinations. More specifically, we've been looking at digital rectal examination. Now, this is a commonly performed physical examination where really we're aiming at the early diagnosis of disease, and this can be cancer disease, prostate, rectal cancer, but also looking at assessing things like the sphincter tone and others as well. It is particularly challenging to learn and teach because it is an on-site examination. This means that the medical student, the trainee, cannot really learn from the instructor demonstrating because he or she cannot see what is happening. And equally important, what we find is that the instructor cannot really give very useful feedback in terms of how the examination is being conducted because, again, he or she cannot see what the trainee is doing. We did a pilot study a number of years ago where we had medical students that went through a 2.5-hour session of learning how to perform the examination. I was really focusing on the communication skills more than anything. And then at the end, we asked the students whether they felt confident to do the PR. And to our surprise, most of them say that yes, they felt confident to go and examine the patient. And we got a little bit concerned because we thought, well, actually, probably there's much more to this than what we can see on just a single session. So traditionally, this examination is learned on benchtop models like the ones shown here. Different manufacturers made out of plastic, silicone. Some of them have a range of variability. So you can see here on the bottom left corner, there are 5 different prostates that can be interchanged on the model. But the model is pretty crude, really, and in general, I think that is recognized that it has severe limitations, including the fact that it cannot provide any feedback to the trainee. And of course, we must not forget the fact that it's not just about the clinical, sort of technical skills, but also it's about the patient who's in the middle and who's there lying, waiting for the doctor to sort of tell the patient what he or she found. And what cannot be done is say, well, I'm not sure, let me do it again. Okay, so there are big challenges in terms of this examination. What we've been doing is developing a range of tools, as I mentioned, trying to cover really the knowledge acquisition, the procedural skills training, but also developing confidence. At one end we have the plastic models, and of course at the other end we have the patients, and it's also relatively common to practice on patients at some point. What I'm presenting here is a tool that allows the trainee to see through the models. So it's a bit of an augmented reality, but without using the headset, the Google Glasses or HoloLens. The configuration is shown on this slide where we have position tracking using electromagnetic trackers, but also we have a pressure sensor. So this is attached to the finger, and we can track the movement of the finger and also measure the pressure that is being applied. 3 different ways of operating. We can do it through a head-mounted display. We can do it through a display where the student is shown what is being seen inside. But also we can have another mode where the student is examining the model and only the tutor instructor can see the inside for feedback. Just to illustrate the concept, here we have the model. And that's what is inside, really, a silicone tube that is representing the rectum. And then we have the prostate there. What we can do through our system is we can enhance by augmenting the anatomy. So this anatomy is not present in the model, but we can show that. The setup, again, we've got the benchtop model that we're using. We've got the sensors there. looking at it through a screen, and that's the view that they get with the enhanced augmented anatomy. Just a short little video illustrating what they would see. So this is the hand represented on the view with the finger being inserted and then tracking the movement. You can see a degree of deformation that is illustrated, and you can also look at a closer view there. Now, what we did as part of this study is we wanted to find out what was the usefulness, the educational value, and whether this was something that both clinicians and students felt could be useful in terms of the learning and teaching of this examination. We had 53 participants. The study was done here at just opposite the medical school at the Tantok Hospital. 53 participants, 30 clinicians from the different specialties that perform this examination. And we had 23 LKC medicine students, years 1 and 2 and 3. I think there was one from year 5. And we did two things. We did a semi-structural interview, so as they were examining the model, then we did an interview, and also we did a questionnaire. So here I'm just presenting results from the online questionnaire, and of course we had IRB approval from the university here. Looking at two different aspects really. One was different components of the see-through visualization of the system, and then we also looked at the educational value. So in terms of the system, questions related to how useful the system will be for demonstrating the position of the examining finger. Obviously this is something they cannot normally see. Better understand DRE in terms of the anatomy, in terms of the context. Also reflecting on the palpation, and what this means is really being aware of where the finger is moving and what the finger is palpating. Particularly, we are also swapping the different prostates, being used for the assessment of performance as well, and there's another one that is to do with feedback. And what we can see, without going into a huge amount of detail, we can see, in general, both clinicians and students agree or strongly agree that the system was useful for all of these different aspects. Again, in terms of the feedback as well, you can see fairly good agreement between clinicians and students in terms of the whether the system would be able to provide feedback for the palpation skills. In terms of the educational value of the system, again, 4 different aspects here. One related to the palpation, so being able to use the system during palpation, being able to have the additional augmented anatomy, and those 2 aspects were considered as having educational value both by clinicians and students. In terms of the deformation of the surrounding anatomy when the palpation is taking place, and there's a degree of deformation, it really is not known how much it deforms because again that hasn't been measured. And in terms of the virtual reality, so using an immersive VR headset, there was less agreement in terms of how useful this would be educationally. But also we had a wide range of comments from the participants. This is just a snapshot really highlighting some key parts that sort of kept coming up. One of them was that although the visualization is useful, actually having a more realistic model, it really is key because the models as they are now are not terribly realistic. Excuse me. This is a comment from one of the students that said, well, I haven't examined a patient yet, but having this visualization is an improvement over current models, as well as comments related to how we might improve our system, perhaps allowing the layering of the anatomy, so toggling that on and off, perhaps also being able to have different views as well. And in relation to the virtual reality, again, sort of a mixed views really as how useful that might be compared to having just a display, a standard display. And I'll let you read this one, quite extensive feedback there, both in terms of the usefulness and how it might improve. Again, mentioning that if we are measuring the pressure already, we can perhaps provide some feedback in terms of the range of useful pressures that are applied. So to conclude, both students and clinicians were overall positive regarding the usefulness of the system. There are a couple of elements that we need to explore further in terms of the deformation, in terms of the use of a head-mounted display. And I guess this was highlighted as quite important, improving the bench to model and suggestions for further functionality. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much. I'm open for questions.
Questions?
Very nice study. Thank you very much. Where do we go from here? What's your vision about that? Do we need, with regard to your question, do we need physical models which also have anatomical variations, or in which you can give tactile feedback, or can we skip that and go for a digital solution?
So I'm going to answer that as a sort of a developer from the technical side of things. But we also have Glenn here, who is one of the co-authors, and he's a GP. He can probably comment on that as well. I think that we definitely need to have that tactile component, really, and because it's inherently tactile, this examination. In fact, there's no visual feedback. Therefore, I think the solution whereby it's purely virtual is not really going to cut it. We ourselves are developing a simulator that doesn't have a bench to model, but replaces that by having sort of the outside, shall we say, and then inside we've got a haptic device that recreates that feel. Okay. But this was a very interesting study because, of course we thought, well, the VR is going to be a winner, everyone's going to be really excited. And actually the majority of participants say, well, yeah, it's cool, but it doesn't necessarily add that much, having just a display there. Glenn, do you want to say something?
I think it would be useful to have pathological specimens in the future, including prostates that have disease, that are enlarged, and having rectal lesions. So that will be something I think we probably can develop in the future. But it's quite good for the students to be able to visualize what they're feeling. I think that is the winner in this case, because most of us do a DRE and you're not sure if you're feeling the right thing, the tutor's not sure if you're feeling the right thing. And so I think this is there's a lot of work that can be done. That's very good.
I think the feedback part is really cool.
Yeah, I think what you do is quite interesting in terms of tables, like the lung sound. You can actually recreate a normal feeling prostate and an abnormal feeling prostate. That would probably be something that would be more meaningful for the student or the junior doctors that are practicing.
And then the added feedback,
correct,
showing them what it looks like.
The trouble is though, for clinicians, we don't know how to get those things, and we have to rely on clever engineers to be able to devise these things. We need to work collaboratively.
And we have to rely on clinicians to be able to end up with a product that is fit for purpose. Otherwise, we might do just very exciting things, but not really useful.
Usually when we consider as educators, when we consider any training, like this kind of trainers, we look at the cost. So if you look at the cost of this model and the already available, commercial available one, so is there any difference in the cost? Or?
Of course, there is a bit of an additional cost because the idea of this project is that we can adapt it to any benchtop model. The additional cost is in terms of the sensor technology, which I guess probably around £1,200, £2,000 at most. But we chose this specific technology because these companies, they have what they call the OEM, so we can work with them towards developing a product that is more self-contained and more compact. If I can just add, this is a little bit of a byproduct. We started at the very beginning, as one does, being very ambitious and thinking about this sort of fully fledged haptic simulator, virtual reality, all of those things. And actually we only had to do this because although we asked the experts, we needed to find out exactly what was happening. By doing that, we realized, well, this in itself can be a useful tool because buying the expensive simulator might be possible for some schools, but actually all the schools have this type of models. I mean, we can just provide an add-on that will be able to give feedback that might be something cheaper, more affordable, but also in many ways more sort of useful, really.
Okay, thank you, Fernando. Thank you so much. So, we're going on to the journey. I think we started with augmented reality. There's virtual reality switch and an extension to traditional type of part-time training medical simulation. Now we are taking one more player in the mix of immersive learning, which is more serious games, the games element. So I would like to welcome Eleni to present her work. The floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Eleni Bazakidi. I am an orthodontist by profession, and I have done research here at the Department of Medical Education at NTU with Dr. Zary. We will be talking about the key trends from 20 years of research on serious games in medical education. The reason for this study was to identify the trends and provide the serious games community with insights for future initiatives. It is appreciated that games may have a pedagogical value, helping motor coordination, creativity, collaboration. But these are often byproducts. A game must be fun. That is the primary purpose. Therefore, serious games sound like an oxymoron. The fun part is negated by the stern seriousness. A serious game, or applied game, is a game designed for a primary purpose other than pure entertainment. I would like to talk about two key milestone dates. The first book using the term serious game was published in 1970 by Clark in his homonymous book. 32 years later, in 2002, Ben Sawyer wrote his white paper entitled Serious Games, Improving Public Policy Through Game-Based Learning and Simulation. As the title suggests, this paper is a call to use the technology and knowledge from the entertainment video game industry to improve game-based simulations in public organizations. 2002 was also the release date of America's Army, a game considered as the first successful and well-executed serious game that gained total public awareness. Let's look at what serious games actually means. In 2005, Stokes postulated a new definition for serious gaming: games that are designed to entertain players as they educate, train, or change behavior. I think this definition is more relevant to the one that Abt introduced 30 years earlier. Nowadays, the term is used to cover a spectrum of computer-based simulations for training or education in a single or multi-user environment. Serious gaming is used in different fields, such as military, aviation, education, and healthcare. In healthcare, two main areas of serious gaming can be distinguished: for professionals and for patients or the general public. For this study, we examined the metadata on serious games in medical education and narrowed it to the education for medical doctors as undergraduate, postgraduate, and medical specialties, dental, pharmacy, and nurse education, and allied health. The reason for that definition was that the scope of knowledge in these professions has overlapping areas and skills. Even though there are reviews on the topic, we did not find any that examined the trends in the field for the past 2 decades using metadata. So, for this study, we performed our search on Web of Science core collection database. This was an iterative process to define both serious games and medical education. One of the key insights is that serious games is not an established field of study and therefore often not used as a term. Therefore, we decided to use the broader term of games as well as derivatives such as gamification. We included papers about digital games and simulations with game elements only, but excluded the ones about virtual reality and e-learning applications. As you can see, while both games and medical education have a large number of papers, when you combine both, it leads to a very small subset. About 1.7% of game-related papers are related to medical education, and about 0.04% of medical education papers are related to games. These results were then reviewed, and based on observations, I created filters to remove non-relevant results. We decided to limit the publication date from 1996, as most earlier papers did not have abstracts available. In the end, our set review was 274, which was about 1/6 of the set produced by the first set of criteria on Web of Science. I will now present the key findings of our work. Starting, we attempted to identify the point zero, the origins of the first research in serious games in medical education. As explained, the term serious games is not well established, and therefore a lot of the papers, especially the earlier ones, do not explicitly refer to the research as serious games. For example, some refer to video games in medical education. Therefore, it is very hard to be precise about the first use of the full term serious games in medical education for doctors. I will not attempt, therefore, to be precise, but rather to point at the early efforts. The first paper in the dataset we examined is from 1996 and discusses a simulation game in nurse education. The first paper that explicitly calls out serious games in medical education in its title comes 11 years later in a paper by Case Western Reserve University. Let's look in more detail the research papers by year they were published. We notice an overall increase in literature from 1996 to 2018, which demonstrates a healthy growth in the interest of this subject. We can distinguish three phases. First, the exploratory phase up to 2006, then the early growth from 2007 to 2012, and the development phase from 2013 and onwards. From 1996 to 2006, from the first phase, which is 11 years, 14 articles were published. In the next period, from 2007 to 2012, which is 6 years, 77 articles were published. And in the last and recent one, from 2013 until 2017, 5 years, 159 articles were published. So, we have moved from, on average, 1.3 articles per year during the first period to 12.8 articles per year during the second period, and 31.8 articles per year in the last period. Even though the articles produced decreased in 2017, it seems that it picks up again in 2018 if we consider that we gathered articles from the first 8 months of this year only. We will now examine the key conferences used in publishing papers on this topic. We can see a diversity of conferences on the topic, really a very long tail. But one stands out, which produced the largest number of papers in our collection. The IEEE International Conference on Serious Games and Applications for Health, which has been held on most years since 2011. However, only in the 2016 conference, 5 papers on the subject were published. Now to the countries represented. Most of the papers written in the topic came from the USA with 91 articles, by far the most. When looking at the geographical area of North America, which means combining USA and Canada, we have 122 articles. The most productive European country on the topic is the UK with 30 articles. And when we add the articles by all European countries, we see that they are 128, which makes Europe the one mostly active area in the topic. Asian countries have 13 papers in the group, led by China and Singapore. Next topic of our study was the research areas that each paper addresses. Obviously, several articles spread over more than one research areas, such as surgery and healthcare sciences. Of the medical specialties, the most researched for topic is surgery with 39, nursing education with 30, followed by general internal medicine and rehabilitation. To analyze further the research area trends, we would need a secondary analysis using a thematic approach. Now let's put everything together and examine the key dates in the evolution of the field. In 1970, the first book using the term serious game by Clark Abt. In 1996 is the first paper in our dataset about the simulation game in nurse education. In 2002, the white paper was written entitled Serious Games, Improving Public Policy Through Game-Based Learning and Simulation. In 2007, we have the paper using the term serious gaming to teach clinical cancer genetics by Case Western Reserve University. In 2013, we have the start of the growth area in publications. And 2016, we have a peak in number of publications. Now let's see them all together in chronological order. As you can see, we have an acceleration of milestones showing the interest in the field. So here are some conclusions from our research. This is a new field getting accelerated interest by researchers. Serious games applied to patients and general population has attracted a larger research interest than serious games for medical practitioners. US dominates research, but Europe as a whole dominates North America. Asian researchers are not significantly represented, so this is an area of opportunity for this part. There are no firmly established journals and conferences, and the key medical areas that serious games are applied are surgery and nursing education. Yeah.
Questions?
Thank you for an interesting presentation. Can you give me an idea of the quality of the papers that have been published? So you told us about volume, but how robust are these studies, and how, what is the level of evidence that has been created?
Well, in order to, what we did was we checked the metadata of the papers, and to answer your question, one would have to do another study to look at the quality of individual papers. Overall, there was a very big variety of papers. Some were systematic reviews, and some were talking about some specific game or a group of serious games. There are some papers that have gone into qualitative research on these, but this is not. This was not our purpose for this particular study.
Well, I ask because a major barrier to the adoption of serious games is the lack of really good quality randomized clinical trials demonstrating efficacy. Just like
Yes, and this may be one of the reasons that even though serious games have been around for quite a long time, they have not been extensively used yet in medical education, because in medical education, unless you know the efficiency of a new method, it is there is a resistance in implementing it throughout the curriculum.
More questions? Then I would like to thank you so much, Eleni, for your presentation and giving us a view on this emerging field. So we're moving to the next speaker. So the next speaker is back to virtual reality. He's going to talk about designing a virtual reality simulator for total hip replacement. The floor is yours, Kartik. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. A little bit different. This is all about hip replacements, but I wanted to review virtual reality in terms of how we at Imperial have seen it and how to apply it to curriculum training and surgical training. So firstly, practice. Practice makes perfect, and practice is a staple for any high-performance sport, playing a musical instrument, and certainly for aeroplane pilots as well. And this is an Airbus A350 simulator. It costs about 18 million It lives in France. It costs about $1,500 an hour for a pilot to go on, and about 18 million, again, per annum to run. So this is really, really realistic. The pilot's inside, it moves obviously with the legs there, and therefore it saves lives. And when you're driving a 300 million pound device with 500 people on board, maybe it's cost effective. But for surgery, maybe that's not so cost effective, because there's lots more surgeons doing a much wider breadth of procedures, and we're all over the world, we don't have access to these kind of simulators. So what do we as surgeons, or what we as medical professionals need is something slightly different. We need something that's safe, of course, effective, validated, reliable, affordable, and accessible. And none of the things apply to that, right? So what we think is we need to move on a little bit from the mannequins, which we currently use, just like Marie mentioned earlier on. It's imperfect, they're not entirely effective, but maybe they do teach the ABCs quite effectively, maybe they do teach the pump and the pressure, but for surgery, maybe it's not so effective. For surgery, we use these are cadaveric laboratories, and again, they're not very accessible, but they're highly realistic. The problem is, of course, you might do a hip replacement or a chest drain or anything on a cadaver, and there's no objective metric of how well you've done. You've got no idea whether it went really well, or that mess at the end was a success or a failure. So we have these kind of things now. These are arthroscopic or laparoscopic or even gastrointestinal colonoscopy trainers, which are really, really cool. They're mainly computer-aided design. At the end of it, you can work out how awful your movements were, or whether you punctured the side of the esophagus and the patient's bleeding. It's very, very good for assessing competence and tracking someone. But again, that's all for keyhole procedures, right? How about actually what happens worldwide? Open surgery is the far bigger problem. How do we train for that in rural environments, but also in LKC or Imperial? So here's the challenge. Surgery is getting more complicated, more interventional procedures are new, we need to learn things faster, but actually in hospitals, certainly in the UK, European working time directives, in America as well, there's reduced training opportunities, there's a limitation number of hours we can work. So actually productivity is a priority, we need to deliver learning very, very quickly. The best of current generation simulators are ineffective, particularly for team training and for open surgery, that we just discussed just now, and we need objective metrics of skill to track and certify competence. So we think virtual reality is about ready. It's an adjacent technology, and we've all seen this kind of thing in a shopping mall near you. It's used for entertainment, automotive training, for manufacturing, for selling houses, for tourist experiences. And you know, as this guy is showing you right here, some people say, well, is it realistic enough? And you know, it's pretty realistic. So it's about realistic enough for real surgery. But can we use it for medical education? That's the question. Is it good enough to train surgeons? So this is a little a disc of validity, the different types of ways of testing an instrument or a surgical tool or any medical educational tool. And well, this is what I do day to day. I'm an orthopedic surgeon in training, and this is a hip replacement. Lots of different ways of doing it, but we like to think as surgeons that this is a really complicated task, a good marriage between technical and non-technical skills, lots of knowledge, skills and behaviors. So maybe this is a good vehicle for testing if VR could deliver training for hip replacements. Also, it's pretty complicated, a lot of team players here, lots of instruments across the bottom here. So again, could we make a nice VR simulator to train for the dexterity, the knowledge, the skills of hip replacement surgery? It's an opportunity to rehearse the skills, for trainees to achieve autonomy a bit earlier before they get into the real operating theatre and make mistakes there. It's a way to standardize training, so the guy at the back of the room has the same training as the guy at the front of the room. The senior registrar has the same training as the junior registrar, rather than either favoritism or opportunity or luck. But most importantly, maybe VR can objectively assess and train technical skills, and maybe you can give a certificate to someone to make sure they're ready for theatre before they even get there, to really accelerate up that learning curve. So this is a blueprint for what we've been doing, which is collecting lots of data about how something should be done, for example, hip replacement, creating a simulator for it, validating it, and working how to integrate it into a curriculum. We went around the world. These are surgeons from London, from Canada, from North America. We had lots of interviews, some visits, video analysis as well, of how they perform hip replacement. And using a Delphi method, which is basically an expert consensus, we distilled hip replacement into about 56 core steps, decisions, and domains. So we had loads of really great information that looks a little bit on paper like this, which is the technical steps, the decision points, the errors and solutions, the expert tips. Lots of information, but slightly unusable, but very good to design into a VR simulator. The next thing we did was, as Dr. Bello and everyone in this room has been stressing, is collaborate. We work with Johnson & Johnson, a big medical education device company, and a CAD lab as well called Pixel Molcry, with my department called MSK Lab, to create a new simulator. We wanted a visual and tactile interface with surgical tools in it, the environment, the pathology, real feedback, and metrics. We storyboarded everything, so taking it from those orange and blue charts I mentioned earlier into working out what almost like a movie set might do for a given script. And this is the kind of things, our first attempt at what we came up with designers and CAD designers, a bit like Dario here in Switzerland. And so here's Uche, one of our junior surgeons in the top corner. He's put a virtual reality headset on, as you can see, with handles controlling his arms. And he's inside a VR theatre with a patient there, instruments behind him, and a coach telling him in his ear exactly what steps next. And as he's moving his arms around, going, watching around, he can take instruments, the right instruments only, and cut the skin and ream the tissue or prepare the bone, insert the implants, with haptic feedback as well when he's hammering things. And every time he does something wrong, he's told and coached as well what he's not to do. And therefore he's learning not just the knowledge and the skills and behaviors, but also the sequence of exactly how to perform a total hip replacement. So because of all that work, we have established now that we have some content validity. The experts have done it, we've got the creators to make that. We wanted to ask our surgeons whether actually it felt anything like real surgery, and that's called face validity. We use a technology acceptance model, which is a bit of seminal work by two guys called Davis and Venkatesh about 20 years ago, and they thought, well, you can ask lots of people lots of questions about how well it looks, but actually, what's its perceived usefulness? Is it easy to use? What do they intend to use? And actually, in their current department, in their current workspace, would they be able to implement VR training? And that's a good way to assess if a new technology is ready for actual acceptance in the real world. So lots of graphs, purposely small, just to whiz through and say everything on the left side is strongly agree, and everything over here is disagree. And we asked them lots of things about the environment, how realistic that was, whether the sequence was good, the VR operating room was realistic, the patient was realistic, the knowledge they learned, the non-technical skills such as the decision-making or situational awareness. You can see this was a single-player game, unlike real surgery, so communication wasn't rated very highly, and also some task-specific skills too. In general, we found that actually the surgeons really enjoyed what they're doing, they found it highly realistic for the level they needed to, but they weren't ready to use it in their environment because of the feasibility of the cost. So the cost is about $500 per headset unit, about £1,000 for the computer. So we're getting there, but actually that might still be too much for, let's say, a district general hospital in the middle of the north of England. The next thing we want to do is check, well, if someone did really well in VR, could those same numbers be measured in real life, in a real simulator we have here? So in the top corner we have all the real instruments, a bony pelvis, and we asked them to orientate the cup. And what we found is that whatever they did in VR was pretty good in terms of what they did in real life. Not on a patient, but on another simulator. So we had concurrent validity there. We did that for femoral neck osteotomy as well. You can see some angles and numbers here, so they can actually train how to orientate their saw. And then in a randomized controlled trial, we tested it against the best available conventional training, which is face-to-face equipment, dry bone training, and surgeon visits. We got some learning curves out of it as well, because these 32 surgeons, real surgeons, did it over 5 sessions, and we measured lots of stuff, like how they improved their time, their efficiency, the global rating scores, their orientation scores as well. And finally, what we did was work out whether the VR trainer could differentiate between an expert and a novice. So we went to Canada for this, with lots of anterior hip surgeons there. We recruited about 20 surgeons from PGY1 to consultants, and just for one metric here I'm showing you, the simulator could differentiate between really skilled people and people who didn't really know what they were doing. Now, the gold standard test for a simulator is, well, does it actually transfer to reality? Do people in simulations do better hip replacements in real life? So the only way we could do that reasonably is in cadavers. So what we did was we borrowed Dr. Bello's inflatable operating theatre, took it to Charing Cross Hospital into the cadaveric laboratory, got 16 surgeons in, 8 of whom trained in VR, and then asked them to perform a cadaveric direct anterior hip replacement. And these surgeons had never seen a hip replacement in real life, they'd never done one in real life either on this particular technique, and only in VR. And what we're able to do is measure them using what we call a national curriculum for hip replacements, and they got from basically unable to actually pick up anything 6 months ago to a point where they were competently able to perform a hip replacement on a cadaver with supervision. So we felt that maybe the simulator could transfer these skills from the digital world to the real world. So this is our blueprint here. This is what we were asking, whether VR is feasible, usable and realistic, whether it can deliver technical and non-technical skills, whether it can train junior surgeons on a learning curve, can it differentiate between different levels of expertise, and can it transfer to reality? We've said yes to most of these. I think we're on day one of the history of what immersive VR can do, so it's exciting. And also our next step really is to work out how multiplayer VR can train the nurse, the scrub nurse, the assistant, the registrar and the surgeon at the same time in the same space. So that's coming. I've got to thank lots of people from Imperial, from Canada, from Johnson & Johnson, Pixel, and my colleague Bran as well, who's speaking tomorrow a bit more about this. And I welcome any questions. And please follow us on our Twitter account there for more updates in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Questions?
Thanks, Kartik. Excellent work. I wonder whether, from the pictures I can see that you're using binoculars and then the game controllers.
HTC Vive, yeah, but yeah, very similar.
Have you found any limitation in terms of the haptics that you can get, which effectively is vibration, isn't it? Any limitations in terms of the simulation there?
Absolutely. So the main problem we have with the current technology is that yes, it's cheap, yes, it looks great, but it doesn't feel great. So you can feel the impact, and we have, for example, hammering and so on. We can change the level of vibration depending on the swing and so on. And we can grip tools, but we're waiting for the next generation with haptic gloves to make a difference. What we're measuring is not the dexterity or the fine tissue skills of the surgeon, but this is a really complex task for a sequence and a choreography, and we're able to deliver that. And we think for now, if a surgeon can get to the point where he knows all the steps and all the instruments safely, he can focus on his finer skills with a consultant in real surgery.
My question is about cost. I know that you've got the sponsors and what have you. For most places, then they might not make sponsorship, and cost is a real issue. Cost is one thing, but at the end of the day, if you are able to do the simulation to lots and lots of people, at the end of the day, it's actually cheaper to do so. So it's more of a comment rather than anything. But cost is definitely that people usually say, we can't do this, it's too costly. Who's going to pay for it?
I think that's a very fair point, because if you go around lots of orthopedic departments around the world, you see cupboards that have simulators that all cost £100,000 locked away and without use. Now, we think that we may have a product that's a little bit better because it's commercially available, and it costs less than $2,000 really all in all to get out there. So compared to a cadaveric lab, that lab that we ran 3 weeks ago, it cost £6,000 to run a day. So we could have bought 3 headsets and trained 100 surgeons quicker than one cadaveric day of teaching. So I think that VR, because it's an adjacent technology, has come to a point for cost effectiveness. But the real cost is, as you mentioned, not delivering it, but in developing it. We've been very lucky to have good partnerships with Johnson & Johnson or Pixel. And the nice thing about universities like here and Imperial or any other educational university like Leiden is that you have all the brain power, and that's what, in a way, that Johnson & Johnson or Pixel don't have, is the clinical interface. So actually it's a very easy relationship where we pay nothing, but we give all our academic knowledge, and they give us nothing, but all the hardware and software that they already have employed. I think that collaboration has been really important for this project.
Thank you. Wonderful piece of work. So my question is about fidelity and about immersion. So from your data, can you tell me that the virtual reality component is adding the value to your simulation, as opposed to if I just had that on a two-dimensional screen? Because the surgeon is picking up instruments, but they're not actually performing a task there. So where is the value in the immersion and the fidelity of an immersive VR experience?
I can speak very subjectively first, in the sense that seeing all these surgeons train, about 40 or 45 surgeons, is that when they're in operating rooms, they end up behaving like surgeons in terms of we ask them to actually speak to the staff, to communicate effectively, to to move efficiently, and we're seeing those improvements immediately come through over the learning curve as how they move, whether the instrument's being selected properly, whether they're efficiently moving, whether they're creating errors in terms of orientation. So the fidelity is enough for a surgeon, for example, an orthopedic surgeon, is to ream orientate and place the acetabulate cup appropriately, or perform the incision exactly right, or broach the femur correctly. And I think, I can't prove this just yet, is that if I had a screen, but I was trying to orientate my acetabulate cup over here in an artificial pelvis, I wouldn't be able to make the same psychomotor connection. So that's one element of it, is about the technical skills. And the second thing is that, again, we didn't run a randomized trial comparing screen-based to VR, but a lot of the work we did in the cadaveric lab a few weeks ago was assessing them by recording their audio and recording how they communicated with their staff. And what we found was the immersion in VR was able to get them into a zone where they would actually be able to communicate very effectively with their team members. And I don't know, but I think that using a mouse and a computer screen to do a certain number of tasks wouldn't be able to achieve the same thing. And the final thing, based on your question, was about, well, they were certainly picking things up, weren't doing a task. Well, they were doing lots of technical skills, but mainly in 3 zones. The cup preparation, the stem preparation, and the manipulation of a table, which is a big part of this particular procedure. So again, I think that at the moment using a mouse for those things wouldn't be effective, but I take your point entirely. The best trial would also be comparing it to Oculus or HTC versus a 2D screen.
Thank you for excellent presentation. Is there any the participants complain about headache or motion sickness because there's a lot of head movement, because some literature says that? Do your participants experience that?
Genuinely, we didn't have any of them. Some of them wore glasses, some of them didn't. But compared to the Samsung headset, what we found is that the refresh rate, the hertz rate on the HTC Vive is a lot higher. I think that's why we had an effective experience, and no nausea, no vomiting, no headaches, and so on. The thing about some of the headsets coming out now is that it's all built in. The headset tracks hands and all sorts. But what this particular system had is lighthouses, as in, like someone else showed earlier, 2 cameras outside, and that's a lot more accurate. And that's one of the reasons I think why our rate of medical illness was 0.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. So, as we're about to move to the last speaker, I think this was very good, interesting to see a beneficial collaboration with the industry and validation. So I would like to welcome the last speaker. So we're back to augmented reality, and augmented reality for intra-operative visualization of anatomy and tumor regression in rectal cancer using the HoloLens platform. So we started with HoloLens, and we are concluding with HoloLens, but for a different purpose, right? The floor is yours.
Slightly. Thank you. My name is James Kinross. I'm a senior lecturer at Imperial. I'm a colorectal surgeon. I'm assuming I'm the only colorectal surgeon in the room. So just one word of warning, a few graphic intraoperative images in this talk for any fragile stomachs. So our attempt at using the HoloLens platform is different to that previously presented. We're interested in clinical translation. We're interested in using this technology for patient benefit, and my talk is not really about education. You will see there are some obvious applications in education as we go, but really I'm showing you about clinical use. And we've only really just begun this journey, so I'm not going to show you data, I'm going to show you qualitative as we describe it. As Professor Kumar says, there will be no p-values in this talk. Orthopedics, very simple speciality, colorectal surgery, very complex. Very complex. So I'm going to show you why we need HoloLens in a very complicated surgical specialty. So just very briefly, precision surgery. What do we mean by precision surgery? Well, we mean doing the right operation on the right patient at the right time. Cancer is a very heterogeneous condition, and I predominantly operate on cancer, and everyone has individualized anatomy. There have been 4 great revolutions in surgical practice. The first was anatomical, the second was sepsis and antisepsis. The third was engineering, and the fourth is digital, right? This is going to have the most impact on patient safety and outcomes. And it's about not just improving the oncological outcomes or pathological outcomes, but improving the safety and the quality and the function for patients after surgery. And so that's going to come in the field of deep learning or the use of data, but also how we visualize and use that data. And that data might be biological data, it might come from omics platforms. So the first thing I'm going to show you is our initial experience with the HoloLens platform. Now this work was done by my colleagues, and we supported it, and it's been published, and you can look it up online. And the central premise for us was not to simply apply this technology to a clinical problem because it's cool, and we could go on Twitter and put it on and make ourselves look like we're doing something innovative, but to try and use the technology to fulfill the clinical gap where we need it, where it can do something that we cannot currently do. So we are a major trauma centre. We treat a lot of patients with major trauma, which means our plastic surgeons spend a lot of their time reconstructing limbs, and that's what you can see in this image. Now the problem is when you're reconstructing a limb, you have to reconstruct blood supply, and the best way to identify blood supply is with a CT angiogram. So what you can see here is a CT angiogram. Now what the innovative step here was to be able to use that data actually in the operating room. Because what we typically do to identify perforators is apply a Doppler ultrasound probe, but that's slow and it takes time. It can take sometimes surgeons hours to do that. So in our first study, what we did was we took these CT angiograms. We then got the radiologist to mark on the scan exactly. The pointer doesn't seem to be working actually on the screen. You can see there the surgeon is identifying the perforators for the flap. And then we've taken that, and I'll explain the methodology in a second, into a HoloLens environment by reconstructing it at first in 3 dimensions. And you can see now we've got the markers of the perforators. So when the surgeon's in the operating room, the way we ran the study, we've done 8 cases clinically now. Typically the surgeon would take out the Doppler probe, confirm the Doppler probe had got the right anatomy, and then overlay the CT image. But after about the first case, because sometimes it takes 2 hours to find these things, hours and hours and hours, they just started to bin the Doppler probe and just go straight with the HoloLens platform. And this is the HoloLens platform working in practice. Could you press play on the video? It's just in the bottom left-hand corner. There we go, thank you. So this is it using it in practice. You can hear the volume of the surgeon. So we are simply manipulating the images, much like you saw the guys from Leiden do earlier, over the patient's image. Now we don't, of course, there are smarter ways that we could probably do this, but you're seeing the surgeon literally just track it. And you can see there's a red beam here. I'll show you what the red beam does in a second on some of our other images. But very quickly, once you line up the anatomy, you can see exactly where the perforator vessels are. So you just missed them on the green arrows. So we looked at this and we were thinking, well, how else could we apply this sort of technology? Now, in this, they've used CT angiogram. But in my specialty, which is rectal cancer, MRI is probably the imaging modality that's had the single greatest impact on the way we manage rectal cancer. So rectal cancer is a difficult thing to teach surgeons to operate on because it's down, the rectum when you operate is deep in the pelvis, down a deep dark hole. And quite often when you're in the surgical field, you can't see what the operating surgeon is doing. But it's also a complex problem because it's got highly variable anatomy. And quite often we treat patients with upfront chemoradiotherapy. So we will have a disease pathology, we will intervene, and then the pathology will change, the anatomy will change. We're then in a position by the time we operate on those patients that we don't know when we're in the operating room what the original pathology looked like or what the original anatomy was, because the change can be quite marked. So the questions really for this were, number one, well, can we use 3D augmented MRI imaging in the operating room to help better visualize anatomy, to do a safer operation? But can we introduce another dimension, which is time, into those imaging fields so the surgeon can see time and the impact of those interventions as they're operating? So really, the aim of this really was proof of concept. Is it practicable in the real world? And could we develop a method for the interpretation of MRI scans? And then to establish feasibility by doing it in vivo. So this is what we did. We've done it in 2 cases so far. We've got a 3rd and 4th ones lined up. So these are 1.5 Tesla MRI, and we divide up those images into 3mm slices. The key thing is that we had to get pre-intervention and post-intervention scans before we took them into the operating room, and actually that takes a bit of time because these patients will often have therapy that lasts 5 weeks, and they will have 12 weeks of downstaging before they come to theatre. We made a decision to go for specific anatomical regions that we know that that are of critical importance in surgery, so damaging nerves is very bad for erectile function or bladder function after surgery, so we want to protect them. Similarly, you obviously don't want to make a hole in any big arteries or veins. And then we had a bunch of oncological outcomes that we were interested in, so circumferential resection margins, something called EMVI, which is an important prognostic factor in rectal cancer. Once we've done that image segmentation, we then had to export those files into ITK-SNAP and then manually reconstruct them. Because you've got a 3mm slice, there's a little gap between the slices, which we then had to manually fill in. And then we finally imported that into using Unity, and then we were able to import those completed images into the HoloLens platform. So we looked at two patients. The first was a 56-year-old, sorry, actually the wrong way around. The first was a 41-year-old male. So this is an awful thing about rectal cancer. It's a disease of millennials. If you're a millennial, your risk of rectal cancer is 14 or 15% greater than if you were born in the 60s or 50s. So this is a 41-year-old who was actually a Microsoft executive. He had a horrible, nasty advanced cancer, and he was treated with chemotherapy and then radiotherapy before he went on to have really quite a radical operation. And the second was a 56-year-old woman who had had neoadjuvant upfront long-course chemoradiotherapy. So this sort of demonstrates the problem, and we'll see if the video will play. So this is this lady's pre-op image, and you'll see the cancer will come up just about here, and she's got these awful regions of extramural vascular invasion, which is really nasty, and it's right up on the spine there. And then we've given her treatment, and then we'll see if this one plays. And you can see the same MRI, and you'll have to take my word for it. These little images that you can see now, they've shrunk right down. So actually, it's difficult to see when you got into the actual operating room. So this is how the headset worked initially. So we had a couple of questions. Complex anatomy, can I effectively remove it, can I cure it? So there's probably an application for the HoloLens in the decision making before you even got to the operating room, where you can have some shared experience of looking at that complex anatomy. But then once you're in the operating room, am I in the correct anatomical plane? Am I removing all of the cancer, and am I doing it safely? So this was our first attempt at playing with it. Can you press play again, please? So this is, we got our theatre nurse, she's always the stunt double in all of our videos. So this is patient anatomy superimposed on the nurse in question. Now you can see this is someone with a HoloLens headset filming me wearing a HoloLens headset. So we're having a shared experience of the same anatomy. You can see I've put a laser beam onto my face. Our MRS student now's coded that in. And that's actually quite useful. It's quite surprisingly quite important in surgery. I'm looking at this. Where are you looking? Oh, we're both looking at the same thing. You can both see it, and you know exactly where I'm looking. And what you can see is these little green areas there are those areas of extramural vascular invasion that you can see. And actually it works very nicely. It works in any plane that you so choose to look at it, and you can manipulate the image exactly as we demonstrated in the plastic surgery model. So we felt that this might be useful, and we therefore decided to take it on into a live case. Just so that you can believe me, you can see some of the anatomy that we carved out there. So some of the key anatomy that we need to identify when we're doing deep pelvic surgery. Now, of course, there's a major problem with this, because as soon as you operate on someone, that anatomy changes, right? So this is not designed to be a literal guide. But quite interestingly, it doesn't come out terribly well. There's a slightly sort of faded line there. That's our circumferential resection margin. So that's the anatomical plane I have to dissect in to be sure that I'm removing all of that cancer. And I therefore get a really nice three-dimensional view of it. So much like the guys from Leiden presented, we have a menu, and so when you're looking at the image, you can have the menu. And I put this image up to remind me to tell you that this is a multidisciplinary learning tool, right? So it's a shared experience of learning in a contextual environment, so actually within an operating room. And I put this up because that's Glenn, he's my anaesthetist. He's not my anaesthetist, I don't get to own him or take him home at night, but he works with me. And so every time you put this stuff in the operating room, clinicians go, oh my God, we could use this. So you have to put a spinal anaesthetic in, is what you can see doing that. There is a company in the US, I think it's just had FDA regulatory approval. I think they're called Surgisim or Surgisite, I think. You might correct me on that. I can't remember the exact name. And that was one of their early applications, actually. Can you help the anaesthetic guide radiological therapy? So this is what it looks like in practice. That's me wearing the headset. Now the problem with the headset is that these operations are quite a slow surgeon, take somewhere between 4 to 6 hours. You can't wear it. It's too heavy, it's too hot, it obscures your vision. So there's an immediate ergonomic problem with the headset, but it does work quite well for short periods of time when you're trying to make decisions. The second problem is, of course, is that the way that the images are constructed, actually it obscures your operative field. So this is a view looking into the pelvis. These are two retractors keeping the abdomen open. This is the rectum that I've pulled out forward. We've done quite a lot of the dissection, and I'm overlaying the pelvis onto the operative field. You can see the rectum here. These are these shrunken periods of EVI because it's the post-radiotherapy field, and I can see all of the anatomy. So it's so nice to get that 3D visualization as you're doing the surgery, but actually when you overlay it onto the operative field, it obstructs your view. Could you press the video on that as well? So this is me doing some operative planning. So we've done the majority of the operation here. You can see our theatre nurse has gone to sit down because he knows that I'm messing around and he's bored. And you look a bit silly because no one else who's wearing a HoloLens can see. But actually, it may have an impact on oncological outcomes because it makes you stop and it makes you think. And there's a potential safety step there if there is someone else with a HoloLens because you're having a shared experience of the same anatomy as you do your dissection. You can hear me muttering. So here you can see, before we did the surgery, we overlaid it out. So the nice thing, of course, about the HoloLens platform is you can unpeel layers. So here I can unpeel the bony anatomy. I can go straight down to the cancer itself. So the pink bit here is in the cancer, so I can properly see it. And I can put back up on the layers and then look at both pre or post neoadjuvant therapy. So it does allow you to look through another dimension, which is time. It does allow you, you can effectively reconstruct MRI images and you can put them into the operating environment. Every time we use this, the medical students in the operating room get very excited because they can see what we're doing and they can understand what we're doing. And we were too stupid to capture that critical learning information when we use it, and we've now started to do that. So actually, irrespective of whether or not it's personalised anatomy for that patient being in that operating room at that time, the contextualised learning, so seeing the anatomy in the operating room, on the patient, as the surgeon is doing the operation, we think will have a significant educational impact. So the HoloLens does permit intuitive visualization of treatment response and personalized anatomy within the operating room. And it is probably a multidisciplinary educational platform. Right? It's not just the surgeon, everyone there can learn. But there are inherent challenges in using this in a scaled way. There's a challenge around resource. It's slow to do that imaging. Those images have to be hand-rendered by an individual. And until we scale that in an effective way, at the moment it's too difficult to do on a large patient number. We have an issue with precision registration, so actually precisely localizing that onto anatomy when you're then going to do an operation and you're going to physically make a decision about where to operate is very challenging. And of course there's issues around tissue deformation and headset ergonomics. Where are we going? So this is my last slide, because my time is up. This is where we're going, evidence. We have no evidence that this is of any benefit to the patient whatsoever. Right? And collectively as a community, we now need to solve that problem. So what I'm interested today is trying to collaborate with you guys to try and help solve that problem. So if you're interested in trials, please do come and speak to me. Lots of other people do their work. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Fernando.
Hi, James. Thanks for an excellent presentation. Could you perhaps expand a little bit more in terms of the registration and alignment? Because that's been a problem in terms of the surgery for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And have you got a sense of how much, what level of accuracy do you need?
Okay, so that's a brilliant question. So the answer is that we have not cracked that problem still. It works well enough for plastic surgery when you're going to, where your dissection onto a blood vessel has a margin of error, and you've got parallel technologies to help confirm it. It's enough. It's enough. It's not enough in cancer surgery. When the margin is a millimetre, it's not enough. And there are multiple problems why it's not enough. The first is in the construction of the image and the image rendering. That's not precise enough. And the second problem is the headset itself. The headset is an entertainment headset. It's not designed to be an operating room. So it's fine for proof of concept work. I don't think it's there yet in terms of, for use in surgical oncology. The company know that. And I keep telling them that. So the question is whether or not we're going to have headsets that are designed for clinical use that give the level of precision that we need. Tissue deformation is another massive problem. Like we of course we can solve that. And in open surgery, that's an even bigger challenge. Sorry. No. Yes.
Oh,
yeah, this is just my stuff. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you for a brilliant example of what augmented reality can do. When I talk to the radiologists in our hospital, they continuously say, this is not diagnostic. So 3D is not a diagnostic tool, and only the 2D images are diagnostic, and you can use them for patient care. How do you deal with that particular aspect?
So, I mean, okay, so firstly they're wrong, because we do 3D reconstructions for CT virtual colonoscopy, for example. We reconstruct the colon into 3 dimensions as a diagnostic aid, and the radiologists do that. But the second thing is that we're lucky because we have a great team and radiologists are part of our team. So we solve that problem by bringing them into the field and saying, work with us, you lead the research and we'll help you facilitate it. The third thing is that I think a lot of the applications, a lot of the companies developing the AR, MR space at the moment are really focused on radiology. What we're focused on is the clinical utility of those images that you create, right? So they might be right in terms of diagnosis. So how do you diagnose a lung cancer? I'm not sure AR will improve your ability to do that. What it will improve is your ability to use that data meaningfully in the treatment of patients. Right. So actually another area where they're completely wrong is radiological guided biopsy. Right. Where you put that needle is critical. Right. And 3 dimensions allows you to guide that needle onto target. So they're just wrong. You can tell them they're wrong. But actually to get through it, you have to have an NDT and you have to be part of it. Sorry.
One last question.
Yes.
It's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Orthopedic surgeons, very simple people.
Yeah.
Doing navigation, hip replacements and knee replacements for about 20 years. But that's easy because bones don't really move. What do you think in the next 10 years, how can you deliver something that tracks anatomy as you move around it? Not a precision, but it's so mobile.
So we chose the pelvis specifically because it doesn't move very much. But even that moves quite a lot. So I think this is probably the biggest single challenge in the application of mixed reality technologies to surgery. There are a number of different strategies out there. I'm sure you are aware of all of them. You can apply fiducials, and you can, there are various physical ways of doing it. But I think probably it's going to be the advances in 2 things really. The first is that these headsets have cameras embedded within them, right? So actually they have the capacity to sense and to measure the tissue deformation as you're performing a procedure. At the moment, they're nowhere near precise enough. But there might be an opportunity there to take advantage of that level of technology to try and map tissue deformation in real time. And if you can do that, then maybe you're onto something. But at the moment, we're not there.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up. We've had this big challenge to try to embed so many different technologies and perspectives into the same session. Hopefully you got really a good insight of the complexity of the view. So thank you so much. I thank to all the speakers for their presentations. Thank you for being here. And forced to wrap up, so you have a chance to have some meal, and you have actually a long hour to interact. Please do talk to the speakers, talk to each other. But officially now the session is finished. Thank you so much.